So we are assuming everything about this issue is going to get worked out once we move into forest plan revisions. And Liz is going to tell us how that works, the magic process that we'll be stepping into. But actually, we wanted to talk a little bit more in a social sciences sort of context about how forest planning and interaction with the public can help us with some of these complex issues and how we move through things. Liz Grinspoon is the Region 6 regional social scientist, and she's going to be talking about how human ecology mapping, it looks like. Okay, help me welcome Liz, everybody.
Well, first I want to thank Cheryl for organizing the meeting today, the conference, and now I understand why she wanted me to speak in the afternoon, because Dale and Stanley really set the stage for my talk. Now you know that forestry is a social science, and you know that it's not the fish and the owls and the trees arguing with each other about how to manage the forest best. It's the people who have different ideas about how to manage the forest and use the forest in different ways. So today I wanted to talk to you about a project that I've been working on for the past couple of years. Since the 2012 planning rule, how many of you know about the Forest Service 2012 planning rule? Good. Okay, so since the 2012 planning rule came out, I've been thinking about how we can incorporate social, ecological, and economic information into our forest plan revision process. As many of you know, we've been brainstorming in Region 6 about how we're going to proceed under the 2012 rule. And I started brainstorming with Lee Cervini from the PNW lab, who's a research social scientist, and a graduate student, Diane Besser, came on board about a year ago. And we started thinking about tools, looking at the rule itself, the intent of the rule, and looking at the directives and thinking about how we can best incorporate social, ecological, and economic information into forest planning. And I knew about the successes of Lee's project, which were in project level planning, incorporating social, economic, and ecological information on the Olympic National Forest and on the Mount Baker Snoqualmie. She'd been using a tool called human ecology mapping, which is it's a systematic public engagement approach that uses maps and other spatial tools to gather information about public values and forest uses. And it's a tool for public engagement, and it's a tool for gathering information from the public. And information can be captured about social and cultural values, ecosystem services, and we have Nicola Smith, who's in the audience here, is helping us make sure that we're treating ecosystem services as it should be. She knows about ecosystem services as well as the 2012 planning rule. Special places, historic and tribal land uses, and harvest areas for fish, game, and other forest products, and spatial identification issues. So it's, as I said, it's a strategy for systematic engagement. There are multiple approaches: public meetings, websites, online forums, targeted stakeholder outreach, on-site at trailheads, special events, and standalone kiosks. And recently we've started a pilot project with the Deschutes National Forest to actually begin undertaking human ecology mapping to get an idea of how people live, work, and play on the National Forest to prepare for the assessment phase of forest plan revision. So this is a pilot on the Deschutes. And one of the things that we're in the process of acquiring tablets so that people can input their information the data for this directly onto tablets, and then it'll be easier to summarize and analyze the data. So it's a public engagement tool, and people from residents of local communities can provide information. This is important because the 2012 planning rule, as it says on the slide here, youth, low income, and minority. The 2012 planning rule particularly emphasizes reaching out to environmental justice communities as well as youth. And forest visitors, stakeholders, private landowners, tribes, county commissioners, and public officials, as well as Forest Service staff and other federal and state agencies. So this is what I wanted to give you quickly some examples of what the maps look like. These are the maps that the work on the Olympic National Forest produced. And so you can see density of social values and density of resource uses. And then also, these are maps that came out of the Sustainable Roads strategy. Lee and her team also did human ecology mapping on the Mount Baker's Snoqualmie National Forest. And as you can tell, they generated sociospatial data about public uses of the forest, and that is integrated with the biophysical data in the plan for travel management. So as I said, I've been thinking, so I've talked about what human ecology mapping is and how it was used in project level planning. And then we've been thinking about, so how are we going to do all the things that the 2012 planning rule intends, which is to engage the public in all stages of the planning process. And also, as you know, the 2012 planning rule talks about the social, the ecological, and the economic, the three circles together. And how are we going to do all of this at once? And so, you know, when we were brainstorming, this is the human ecology mapping tool came out as a great way to meet our goals of developing a strategy to engage the public in meaningful and transparent ways. So here I have on the left-hand side of the slide, these are, you can see the minimum rule requirements and then what the task is from these requirements. And then this comes from 43.1, comes from the directives. The guidance for public participation, and then on the right, I have how human ecology mapping techniques can meet the directives. So human ecology mapping produces baseline data on social, cultural, and economic values associated with a forest, and the data is used to develop plan components for social and cultural sustainability, ecosystem services, and monitoring strategies. And it also meets the directives. Ecosystem services, as many of you, if you've read the rule, you know ecosystem services features prominently in the 2012 planning rule, and this is the way that we can address ecosystem services. We can gather data about key cultural services directly from the public, determine hotspots of values or uses in identifying key benefits, and we can use human ecology mapping in collaborative efforts to resolve conflicts. How am I doing on time, Cheryl? 10 minutes. Okay, good. So we did some brainstorming about how we would actually undertake a human ecology mapping project on the Deschutes. This is very preliminary, but we thought about having community meetings in all of the places listed on the left-hand side. We could also have booths at farmers markets, county fairs, rodeos, OHV rallies, and if our project goes according to plan, we'll have tablets at these various places where people can input. We'll have questions, which I'll show you in a minute, and people can input their answers. So we were also considering doing targeted stakeholder outreach and then also online surveys. So this is a diagram, and it relates directly to the diagram that Dale showed of Lee's work. If you remember this circle that Dale Blana showed you earlier, this is another way of looking at that. So we'll have targeted questions to find out how people live, work, and play and learn on the National Forest and the benefits. So human ecology mapping can get at all of these different aspects of forest management. So a lot of people ask, well, how are you going to what kinds of questions are you going to ask to get at this information? So for example, we could ask people to finish the sentence on the left. I benefit from the Deschutes National Forest because, and then we could ask, have the benefits you receive from the forest been changing over time? And the purpose is to identify benefits people obtain from ecosystems, and it's useful for making connections between benefits and ecological conditions, common objectives, and trends over time. And these are all things that the planning rule asks us to do in the directives. So another question, it seems straightforward, but it is really helpful in planning. The Deschutes National Forest is a place that I go to. If I could take one picture of the forest, it would be of. And this helps us identify unique and outstanding qualities and identify valued settings, scenery, and special places. And it's useful for determining distinctive roles and contributions of different places within the forest. And all of these things that it's useful for, as I said, these are things that the rule and the directives ask us to look for. So here's one about favorite places, which is useful for understanding public interests and activities, public value of different sites, and how these special places connect with other areas within and outside the forests. And here's another one that helps us identify ways of better connecting people with the forests. And it's useful for understanding changes in management and offerings, compatibility or incompatibility of different activities and uses. So these last two slides are a summary of what the human ecology mapping approach can do for assessing social, cultural, and economic conditions. And it should say ecological as well there. So we can ask people more general questions. What are some of the ways you use or rely on the forest? That tells us about services. Why an activity is important, tells about values. Places that are important to satisfy these needs and uses. And we can also build a values threats model by asking people about places that they value, natural assets, and ecosystem services. And of course, we would ask that in a way that we may not use the term ecosystem services directly. Ask, is there anything that could happen to threaten what you value? And I think people have a lot of concerns about threats to what they value on the National Forest. So that could be a big one. And I finished a little early so that you can ask questions.
Great talk list, but I think it's going to be pretty much impossible to list all the ecosystem let them do evaluation research on what are the most important eco-services to focus on. So how would you use this work to kind of prioritize what are the key services that people would use in forest planning? Because you can't do all.
Right. I mean, that's a good question. And we're also planning, so this is an initial brainstorming effort. We're also we're in the process of building a strategy for moving forward with forest plan revision. And in some of the models that have been thrown out, we would have some work groups around things like ecosystem services and public participation to help us kind of refine what the key ecosystem services are before we go out there. But I think going out there determining we can use human ecology mapping to cast a broad net to determine what people value on the forest. So are you saying that you think there's too many ecosystem services out there to get an idea of what people value?
Well, you certainly can't do evaluation research on all those services. That would
Right.
be possible. So,
Well,
so maybe you could focus on, how do you prioritize the most important ones to focus on getting really quantifying what's the economic value and the use of the local, it might vary from forest to forest.
Exactly, and that's why Dale mentioned when he was saying, knowing the importance of assessing what the public wants in a context-dependent way. So we couldn't do this on the Deschutes and then apply it to the Willamette or the Umpqua. The planning rule does ask us to look at key ecosystem services. So I think we could cast the net wide using a human ecology mapping approach to determine what people believe are, what people who live, work, and play on the forest believe is the key ecosystem service or the key ecosystem services for that forest. And it will vary from forest to forest. I know yeah, I see what you mean about going through every ecosystem service, but as I said, the planning rule does talk about key ecosystem services, but it's a human value again to determine what is a key ecosystem service.
Liz, how has your work with the Mount Baker's travel analysis process actually influenced their recommendations? Have you seen their draft already?
So I didn't actually work on that project. My colleague Lee Cervini worked on the project. So I don't, maybe Dale knows the answer to that question?
I was afraid you might say that. It's still in progress. They finished it up and they have data, a lot of good descriptive data. The last time they met, the forest resource management team and the travel management folks were developing an index of how they might rate the different routes, for example, based on use and importance versus other ecological or economic considerations, because money is such a huge factor now. So the last time they met, which was about 3 weeks or so ago, they were just developing an index to try and decide how to use that data. So it's all very formative right now.
One more.
In terms of developing hotspots, I would imagine that it's dependent on how many people or whatever are raising the same concerns about a certain area, and that then brings the importance up to being hot. It appears to me that that would be really wrought with the problem of being influenced by a let's get the vote out campaign to basically skew where hotspots are based on one particular group of people. Secondly, how does things, the National Forest belong to everybody, and if this is going to be a depiction of what people want for the forest, how do you incorporate things like what Congress has done in terms of their laws, the people that are the silent majority out there in terms of addressing their needs and weighing the benefits to them in this. So that's sort of a two-part thing.
You ask good questions, and there are planners in the regional office and people on the Deschutes who've asked similar questions. You know, how can you not have the data, how can you have the data, you know, be representative? And, you know, a lot of the way the Forest Service currently gathers public information on what the public wants is looking at, you know, responses to scoping comments, which is also, this method is able to get at or get to a much more diverse group of people than just looking at scoping comments, because scoping comments has, you know, the same problem that you just described as, you know, groups mobilizing to write lots of letters on a topic. I mean, there's no science is perfect. There's always going to be, you know, if people want to skew results, they can make an effort to do that. But I think there are ways that social scientists can use to balance some of these, you know, the information that they're getting.
I have a very quick, in this case, we're going to be kind of lucky because Stanley did a set of focus groups about ecosystem services that we published in a couple places. And now he's also doing a representative sample of the entire county using the same set of representatives of ecosystem services. So we essentially have like three different ways of asking the same types of information.
Yeah, that's a really good way. If you ask the same question in 3 different ways. But I think the reason why we would go to farmers markets, rodeos, OHV rallies, get different cross-sections of the population and people who, one thing that I've heard again and again from forest supervisors is that they really want to get comments from people that they don't usually hear from. And this is a way to do that. The silent middle. Forest supervisors have said again and again, they really want to hear from those people.
Help me thank Liz, everybody.